What is good, all you beautiful people out there? How y'all doing today? That is fantastic. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the channel where we are here to recap what was ultimately a really good and really fun 2023 NFL draft. We're here. I got the page up here on NFL.com. We'll just be scrolling through all the teams in alphabetical order, seeing who they took, talking about who they took, how it's going to help the team this year, how it can help the team down the line, etc., etc. All in all, just giving our overall thoughts. We are starting with the Arizona Cardinals. I loved especially what they did in the first round. They had the third overall pick with Will Anderson still there. They traded out of that spot to 12 with Houston, which I will talk about that when we get to them. Traded back, traded up to ensure that they got a guy who can be their franchise left tackle in Paris Johnson. We all know Kyler Murray has been pounding the table in the pre-draft process for Paris Johnson. He's been doing nothing but singing his praises. And for once, unlike what they were doing with Steve Keim for so many years, they actually listened to what their franchise quarterback wanted to do. And they went up, they got Paris Johnson. I freaking love that pick for them. I also really like the BJ Ojolari pick in the second. Garrett Williams in the third was also not. This is a sneaky steal right here. Michael Wilson in, what was it, the third round out of Stanford. If he can stay healthy, he can be a really, really fun piece for them. He's not the most athletically gifted guy in the world, and Stanford didn't have the most creative passing game, but he showed up and showed out at the Senior Bowl. He has excellent route running. He reminds a lot of people, myself included, of a young Davante Adams. Now, I'm not sitting here saying Michael Wilson's going to beat Davante Adams. All in all, he went in the third round for a reason. But if he hits and he does turn into even half of Davante Adams, Arizona just got themselves a nice deal. Clayton Tune, fine backup pick. I like that. I love the Keitrell Clark pick. They got him in, what was that, the sixth round, 180 overall. I mean, trading the Cardinal Red of Louisville to the Cardinal Red of Arizona. I love that pick for them. He was an East West Shrine Game guy. Also, Dante Stills in the seventh is a nice deal. NFL.com gave them an A. I ultimately agree. This is a really nice draft for the Cardinals and an excellent start in this new regime in Arizona, who will hopefully turn this team into a competitor sooner rather than later. There we go. The Atlanta Falcons. So I gave him an A minus. I'm not going to go that far, though there were a couple players that were like, I actually, contrary to popular belief, I actually kind of like the Bijan pick. I mean, I was talking about this in the draft in the stream. There we go. That Bijan was sort of the first, like Bijan at 8 to Atlanta was the first spot we expected Bijan to go, and sure enough, that's where he went. Though I will say it was a little risky with Christian Gonzalez on the board to still take Bijan, though we kind of expected Atlanta to. The Atlanta, they've always been that team of just take best player available and then we'll worry about needs in the later rounds. So I don't hate the idea of Bijan Robinson. I know a lot of people were all on board with the oh gosh, what was it? Tyler Algier, because he was a 1,000-yard rusher last year. But I like Tyler Algier as an RB1. I love him as an RB2. Him and Bijan run the ball like 30, 40 times a game like Arthur Smith wants to. Like that's perfect in my eyes. Like that is a perfect scenario for Bijan Robinson. Also, getting Matthew Bergeron in the second round was also a really important pick for them because Matthew Bergeron was like the last tackle. They have him listed as a guard, but he was like the last tackle that you felt comfortable taking, that you felt comfortable starting on day one or close to day one. So getting to snag him up over some other O-line needy teams is really smart on their part. And outside of this, the only other pick that I really like is the Clark Phillips pick. That was in what was like the fourth or fifth round. I really like that. Other than that, I think it's a good draft. I'm not going to say it's an A draft like NFL.com is saying, but ultimately, I do think this was a good draft for the Atlanta Falcons. Start small and just build from there. And then the Baltimore Ravens, a team that has historically really just been an excellent drafting team, uh, or at least on draft day. They just been historically a team that really understands value, takes advantage of when guys that fall in the draft that are excellent scheme fits for them. And it was kind of the same thing this year. I really like the Zay Flowers pick in the first round. I mean, now all of a sudden, that same day, I mean, that the first day of the draft was just a great day for Baltimore in general. They locked up Lamar long term. They already have Odell there on a 1-year deal. Now you bring in Zay Flowers, who can be an excellent number 2, maybe even a potential number 1 in the future. He definitely has the skill set and potential to be that. So just make Lamar happy in any way, shape, and form. Trent Simpson, I didn't like him that much at Clemson. But in Baltimore, we know how much they value their linebackers and him learning behind Roquan Smith. I mean, that's probably the best situation for him. Kai Blue Kelly, uh, Caillou Blue Kelly, there we go. Out of Stanford, another Senior Bowl guy. I actually really like him in the later rounds. It was like the 5th round or so. And then this pick, like when I talk about the Ravens understand draft value, Andrew Voorhees in the 7th round is just absolutely ridiculous that he fell that far. I understand why Voorhees did fall that far. I mean, after all, you're talking about a guy who's going to be a 26-year-old rookie coming off a torn ACL. So I get why he fell that far, but to steal a potential starting guard in the 7th round, especially like the 6th, 7th rounds, those are guys you're looking at potential practice squatters, special teamers. So to get a guy in the 7th that could be one day a potential starter for you if he hits, that is absolutely insane. And I agree with the A value on this. Ultimately, there are some guys here that are like, okay, that's fine. I understand the upside with a lot of these guys, but the Ravens are always just such a great team at understanding value in the draft. Buffalo. This is another interesting one. Later round picks are so. I do love the Osiris Torrance pick. I can't believe he fell to the back end of the 2nd round. I thought he was a guy that was good enough to sneak into the back end of the 1st. So the fact that they were able to get him at a position of need in the late 2nd round is incredible that he fell that far. This one is very fascinating to me. Dalton Kincaid, they traded up, they leapfrogged the Dallas Cowboys to go and get Dalton Kincaid. So I don't know if they're going to try and do 12 personnel now or if they're just going to let Dawson Knox walk after his contract. Dalton Kincaid, I said this before the draft that he was like the most similar to Travis Kelce. He's not Travis Kelce, but he's the most similar to it as far as size and play style. So maybe Buffalo, who's just sick and tired of losing to Kansas City or whatever in the playoffs, they just want to have their own guy that could beat Travis Kelce. I don't hate the idea of doing that, but I did question it a little bit, but mainly because I was like, hey, I mean, if you needed line help, I mean, there was Anton Harrison on the board, there was Osiris Torrance, which it was okay at the end because they got Osiris Torrance anyway. But I don't agree with it being an A. I think it's more of like in that B range. All in all, I think it's a decent draft for the Buffalo Bills. Carolina, there are 3 picks here that I freaking love. Obviously, Bryce Young. I mean, it should have been Bryce Young. We all knew it in the back of our minds. It was going to be Bryce Young. And now it's just a wait and see on if he really is the franchise savior for the Panthers that we all believe that he can absolutely be. Now, one of the things before the draft that before the whole trade up to number 1 happened that made Carolina such an attractive spot for a rookie quarterback was because, well, they still had DJ Moore and et cetera, except they traded DJ Moore in the package to Chicago to move up. So it's like, all right, well, you still have DJ Chark and Adam Thielen you signed in the offseason. Laviska Shenault's still there, but he's more of like a gadget guy. So it's not as attractive of a spot. They made up for that by drafting Jonathan Mingo, who I really like Jonathan Mingo. I don't know if he's ever going to be good enough to be like a true number one receiver, but Jonathan Mingo, he's got size. He has a really good release package. He has really good contested catch ability, though he's not as consistent at that as you would like to be. I do think just a little more work on the jugs machine or a little more consistent work on the jugs machine will help that, because his highlight catches are incredible, but they're not as consistent. But I do think with a little work, he could get to that point. So I really like the Jonathan Mingo pick. And this one, staying in state, they did this last year with Eke Ekwonu, and they go back to his and they end up drafting his running mate on that side of the ball when he was there at NC State, Chandler Zavala, another Shrine Game guy that was just as dominant on that side of the line as Ekem was, though Ekem was just he was just a different kind of athlete. Though Zavala is still really good. They got him in, what was that, like the fifth, fifth round. I really like that pick for Carolina. All in all, it was a solid draft for them. I really like that. Now all of a sudden, this team in a weak NFC South can really have the potential to make some noise and maybe even win the division if all these guys that I think can hit do hit. And then who we got next? The Chicago Bears. This is interesting because they got some really good players at good values. For example, like I love the Tyreek Stevenson pick. I love the Gervin Dexter pick. I called that on stream. Zach Pickens is a good one. Roschon Johnson can play because who's there? As far as the running back room goes in Chicago, who's currently there? I don't think they actually have anybody unless there's somebody that I'm just completely missing out on. Hold on one second. I will check it. I got the Hour Lads pulled up here. Because out before they drafted Roschon Johnson, because David Montgomery walked. So their running back room consisted of Deontay Foreman, Khalil Herbert, Travis Homer before that. And yeah, there was really nobody else. I mean, you were rocking with Deontay Foreman as your starter, which is fine. But Roschon Johnson, he was a guy that was kind of the backup. He was the backup to Bijan, and he got overshadowed because of that. But he offers a really nice floor of, at bare minimum, a backup running back. And who knows? In that room, he has the potential to be the starter. And we'll see what he can do as the full-time starter potentially. Now, I know I talked about these guys because I really like the value they got in the mid rounds. It's the Darnell Wright pick at 10 that I'm not the biggest fan of, mainly because I thought that Peter Skoronski should have been the pick there. And Darnell Wright, he played primarily right tackle. He insists that he can play left, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. And also, he's not like the greatest run blocker. Now, you see highlights of him, and he has these insane pancake blocks in the run game, but it's same thing with Jonathan Mingo, where it's like these insane plays. They're just not consistent enough. Though I do like Darnell Wright, I just don't think he should have been picked over Peter Skoronski. And we'll just have to wait and see on that. All in all, though, I think it was a really good draft. Also, Tyler Scott in the later rounds was also a really nice steal for them. And all in all, I think this was again a nice, good, solid draft for the Chicago Bears. And yeah, we'll just have to see how this plays out. I mean, I know that's the same for all these players. Like, we'll look back on this 3 years from now, and we could be completely wrong on all these guys. But at this moment in time, I think this was a good draft overall for the Chicago Bears. Now, the Cincinnati Bengals, this is another team where it's like they got some really good football players at some really good key spots. The Myles Murphy, I'm okay with in the first round. I know for a fact they probably wanted one of those offensive linemen, those first round caliber linemen, really, really badly. Missed out on them, so they took who they thought was the best player available, and that was Miles Murphy. And I like him as a scheme fit there, so I do think he'll be a really good player for them, assuming that last year, his last year at Clemson isn't the norm for him. And then DJ Turner in the second is also a really good pick. He was he the fastest player at the draft? He ran like a 4.26 at the combine. And don't let the speed fool you. He is actually a really, for the most part, pretty refined corner at Michigan, though he is fairly undersized. But I think he will be a good corner, a good solid number 2 corner or slot corner alongside Chidobe Awuzie. They needed someone to be an upgrade over Eli Apple, and DJ Turner is an absolute upgrade over Eli Apple. Jordan Battle in the third round is fine. Then again, this wasn't like the best safety class in the world, but it was fine. Jordan Battle, you can never go wrong with Alabama DBs for the most part. It was fine. I really like the Charlie Jones pick out of Purdue. He is a true slot guy, and I think Tyler Boyd, who has a bit of mileage on him already, uh, he could eventually be a replacement at some point in the future for Tyler Boyd. That could be very interesting, or he can even make some noise even as a fourth receiver. Chase Brown, they needed a running back after they let Samaje Perine walk in the offseason. And Chase Brown, he's very similar to like that Miles Sanders type of back. And I think he could be a really good complement to what they currently have in Joe Mixon, and maybe even a replacement at some point in the future for Joe Mixon if he ends up being too much of a headache. And then Andrea Chevis, another, was he another Senior Bowl guy? I think he might have been. That value in the 6th round is also incredible. I agree with this as an A- grade. NFL.com gave it. I agree for the most part. I mean, they draft a punter as well, but that's like a 6th, 7th round pick. I don't care. All in all, I really like these guys they took. I mean, Jordan Battle's the only one I'm like so on, but these other guys are really good scheme fits and they make sense for this team. I really like that for the Cincinnati Bengals. And then the Cleveland Browns. I am NFL.com only gave him a B. I really disagree with that. I actually think, despite the fact that they didn't have a pick in the first 2 rounds of this draft, I think they made out incredibly well, like almost stupidly well. They got their first pick was 74th overall in the 3rd round, and they used it on Cedric Tillman, who I thought out of the 2 Tennessee wide receivers who everyone was hyping up Jalen Hyatt because he's the speedster. He's the speedster who had more. He had more. Why am I blanking on the word? More production. There we go. I don't know why I was blanking on that word. He had more production at Tennessee than Tillman did, but Tillman was also injured like 4 or 5 games into the season. So that's kind of an unfair judgment on him. But you look at him, they play Cincy twice a year, and they have T. Higgins. They have to go up against T. Higgins, who's arguably the best 50-50 ball winner in the NFL. Cedric Tillman, I'm not saying he's going to be like T. Higgins, but he has the potential to be similar, if not close to, the caliber that T. Higgins is. So I really like that as a first pick. Siaki Ika, they needed just like that big, giant, just space eater in the middle. He can be a true nose tackle for them. That's also was once again really good value for them. And then this one is stupid. They got DeJuan Jones in the 4th round. Like, this is what I'm talking about. Like, Cleveland did not have a pick in the first 2 rounds. They basically got a 2nd round caliber player and a 1st round caliber player, like 1 or 2 rounds later than they should have gone. Like, DeJuan Jones in the 4th round is just stupidly good. And then getting another lineman like Luke Whippler that late. There we go. Cam Mitchell in the 4th round as well is also just insane. And then there's your DTR landing spot. He's a nice value backup. similar to Deshaun Watson in a lot of ways, though not nearly the upside of Deshaun Watson. But he's a good backup that if Deshaun Watson ever gets hurt or whatever, they can throw in DTR in there and he can right the ship as much as you can. So, all in all, they only gave him a B. I disagree. I actually think this is one of the when you just look at the guys they got at the value they got him, I think this is one of the better draft classes of any team this year. So I really like that Browns draft. And then Dallas, look, I really like the Mozzie Smith pick. I really, really like the Mozzie Smith pick. Even though on draft night I had kind of convinced myself they were going to take Michael Mayer, I really like the Mozzie Smith pick. It was a need, and they needed it more. They don't have a great run defense, and they don't really have that good dominating run defending D tackle. And Mozzie Smith can absolutely be that guy. And also mainly because I think they were convinced that Dalton Kincaid was going to fall to them, and they panicked a little bit on that. But even then, if you wanted a tight end because Dalton Schultz left in free agency, fine. But Luke Schumacher, when Darnell Washington and Tucker Kraft are all still on the board, that doesn't make sense to me. Now, Luke Schumacher is in a lot of ways similar to Dalton Schultz, which is ultimately the reason why I think they got him. But I just think there were better offensive line, there were better tight end prospects on the board at that point that were significantly better than Luke Schumacher. So I didn't like that. Also, DeMarvin Overshown in the third is just that was another guy where it's like there were better linebacker prospects. It was same thing with Schumacher just for the linebacker spot. This wasn't a great linebacker class, but there were better options on the board than Overshown. That's for damn sure. All these other guys, it's like it's fine, it's whatever. Though the Deuce Vaughn selection is actually a nice story. His dad is actually a scout. I'm sure everyone's probably seen it by now. His dad is a scout for the Cowboys, and he wasn't allowed to do a report on him. So the fact that they were like, it's seventh round, we'll do this guy a favor and draft his son, and they have a video on it. It's such a beautiful moment. So I really like that. And Deuce Vaughn is also a good player, so he deserves it. Other than that, I do not like this Cowboys draft at all. I really, really don't. It's just I feel like they had better players at these certain positions they took that were available, and they just chose not to. So they gave him a B. I highly disagree. I think this is more in that C, closer to the D range. I would say C mainly because the Mozzie Smith pick, I don't want to say saved it, but he is a really good player at a key position. And then the Denver Broncos, another team that, despite not having a lot of draft picks, made out pretty well for the most part. They got Marvin Mims, who, I kind of hinted at this in the draft during the stream that a lot of teams don't like taking these wide receivers from the Big 12 because they historically have not worked out well in the NFL. But, taking Marvin Mims in the second round, high upside guy who can be a good deep threat for you at some point. I like the idea of taking Marvin Mims in the second. I also like the idea of taking Drew Sanders at the top of the third. I mean, he was arguably the second he was arguably the best or second best linebacker in the class behind Jack Campbell, and we'll get to that later. And all in all, he just seemed like a Denver Bronco. I think he can even be a good guy alongside Josey Jewell, maybe even be better than Josey Jewell at some point in the future. So I really like that in the third round. Riley Moss, the ultra rare white corner, who we got to see a glimpse of at the Senior Bowl. They also got him in the third round. I like that. JL Skinner in the fourth is also a really nice deal as well. All in all, just they didn't have a lot of picks, but I feel like they made the most of them as much as they could. And all in all, it's a solid draft of the Denver Broncos. Not one to write home about, but it's still a solid enough one considering the cards they were dealt. And now we get to Detroit. A lot of people, a lot of people have been talking about this Lions draft, and let's just get let's just get this out of the way. Let's just get their first round picks out of the way. Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 is just awful. I get Jahmyr Gibbs is a good running back. I get he's a good player. He's gonna be a good player for them, especially now they traded DeAndre Swift to the Eagles. But if you wanted Jahmyr Gibbs that badly, you could have traded back from pick 18, traded back to the back end of the first round, and still gotten Jahmyr Gibbs then. Like just in like if this was 20 years ago, like this would have made so much sense because running back was more valued as a position back then. But we're not in 2003. We're in 2023. And the running back position, unless they're this generational talent, like how Bijan Robinson is, a team is not going to spend a first round pick on guys because they know they can get starting caliber running backs in the third, fourth, fifth round of the draft. So I don't get why you traded back from 6. And I think they did that because Devon Witherspoon went right before them when they weren't expecting it. They traded back. I mean, I think they were going to take Witherspoon there because I'm like, you traded Jeff Okudah so you can hopefully get Witherspoon. So I think they panicked and they did the right thing by trading back and getting some more draft capital. I agree with that move. But spending that pick on a running back when Christian Gonzalez was still on the board, I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And the fact that it was a running back just made it even worse. And then Jack Campbell at pick 18, another guy where it's like, yeah, it makes sense. Like he just seems like a Detroit Lion. It makes sense. And Dan Campbell's going to love him. The fan base is going to love him. It makes sense why the Lions would take Jack Campbell. But take him in the second round. You had the 34th pick. You basically had the third pick of the second round. Just take him there. Just take him there. You don't need to take him at pick 18. He was going to be there in the second round. No team was going to spend a first round pick on a linebacker. No one was. It's bad process. It doesn't make sense. And then the rest of it is just kind of like Sam Laporta when Michael Mayer and Darnell Washington were still on the board. I mean, I get it. You can't go wrong with Iowa tight ends. I mean, Detroit would know that more than anyone. But it's still with better tight ends on the board. Sam Laporta just didn't make sense. I will say it was a steal to get Brian Branch in the middle of the second round. Like, that was a steal for them. I was not expecting Brian Branch to fall out of the first round completely. So I will applaud that one. But if that's the case, why didn't you just take Brian Branch at 12, trade it back in the first round, take Jahmyr Gibbs in the back end of the first, and then take Jack Campbell at 34, and then take Sam Laporta at pick 45? It would have made so much more sense. Like, that would have made so much more sense had you just swapped the way you took these guys. And then I'd probably be looking at this draft a little bit differently. So I don't like that. I like the Brian Branch pick, but the process to get him was just a little much to get to that point. And then Hendon Hooker in the third round. Hendon Hooker's fine, but if you were going to take a quarterback, again, you had the 6th pick. Why not just take a chance, trade up to 3 with Arizona? I mean, shit, you made a trade with Arizona in the draft. Just trade up to 3 with Arizona and then just take Anthony Richardson there, and then you'll be set. And you have a guy that can sit behind. I mean, we talked about this before. You have a guy to sit behind Jared Goff, marinate for a few years, and then once you get rid of Goff, Richardson could just slide in there, and that's your guy for the future. I don't think Hendon Hooker, for one, he's coming off a torn ACL, and he's going to be 25 in his rookie year. And once he does take over for Jared Goff, how much of an upgrade is Hendon Hooker really over Jared Goff? maybe he can be a bit better. Maybe he'll be a little more of a reason you win games more so than Goff, but like he's not how much of a needle mover really is Hendon Hooker. So it's very questionable. And I like Brad Holmes. I really liked his drafts in the past under Brad Holmes, but everything about this was just such a head scratching move. And I don't agree. NFL Network gave it a C. I think that's kind of generous, to be honest. I think mainly the reason he gave it a C is because of Brian Branch, as well as also Antonio. I will say Antoine Green in the 7th round is a steal. I will say that. But him, Branch, and Campbell to an extent really saved this draft to being a C. But I think it's lower than that. Then the Green Bay Packers. I love this draft for the Packers. For one, Lucas Van Ness. I don't care what offensive lineman you have. I don't care what your tackles are, your interior. If you have Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness coming to you at both ends, those guys are gonna get pressure on the quarterback. Those guys are gonna get pressure on the quarterback by themselves, let alone both of them on the same team. So that is absolutely nasty. I love that pick in the 1st round for them. Everyone's complaining. It's like, oh, JSN, they didn't get a receiver. Honestly, doesn't matter. We know they weren't going to take a wide receiver. We could all dream that they would, but they weren't going to take a wide receiver in the 1st round. Though, in the 2nd round, I really love their picks on day 3. Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, they double dipped at tight end. They got 2 really good ones. One with high upside. One is you kind of know what you're getting. 2 really good tight ends, because that tight end room in Green Bay was horrible. It was Josiah DeGuara and no one else, and Josiah DeGuara sucks. So they did not have anybody in that room. So double dipping there with 2 really good tight end prospects in what was ultimately a really good tight end class. Packers fans wanted Darnell Washington. I understand, but you still got 2 really good tight ends to work with. And then Jayden Reed, how many times we've seen over the years the Green Bay Packers taking these guys, they have their certain mold at wide receiver. You got to be at least 6'2", and if you're fast, great, but we don't care if you're fast. We need these big body, tall receivers, and that's all we go. They all go for. That's all they go for. Christian Watson, though Christian Watson is a beast, still fits that mold. Romeo Doubs, Alan Lazard, like that's all Brian Gutekunst goes for, is these tall receivers. And if you are under 6 foot, you're screwed. This year, they finally broke the mold with that, with one of my favorite receivers in this draft in Michigan State's Jayden Reed. He was another Senior Bowl guy. He killed it at the Senior Bowl. And he was one of the more consistent deep threat winners in all of college football last year, which is saying a lot considering he at Michigan State, they did not have the most dynamic passing game. And he was still able to establish himself as one of the best deep threats in the nation. So to get him in the 2nd round, and he provides an element that they just do not have, I freaking love that pick for the Green Bay Packers. The rest of the draft is fine for the most part. The Sean Clifford pick, I mean, I don't know anyone who hasn't been ripping on the Sean Clifford pick. I haven't even seen him as a draftable player on anybody else's draft boards. So I don't know why Green Bay, especially considering like if you wanted a backup quarterback, Tanner McKee was available, DTR was available. I'm pretty sure Clayton Tune was available by that point. So, if you wanted a backup quarterback, you just could have taken this guy, not a guy who even Penn State fans didn't even like. So I don't get that. I do like the Karl Brooks pick. Was in the 5th round. So all in all, though, while the rest of this draft was good outside of him, the rest of these mid-round picks are fine. Most of them probably won't even make the team, but most of these picks are fine. I love what they did the first 2 days. These 4 players on the first 2 days was, I love them. I love them to death. They gave him an A. I fully agree. Green Bay had an excellent draft this year. They really did. And then the Houston Texans. We need to talk about this. So the whole speculation was, who's Houston taking at 2? Are they going to take a quarterback? Are they going to take Will Anderson? Are they going to trade out? Every indication was they're probably going to take Will Anderson or trade out. They end up taking CJ Stroud, and I understand why they did that. They didn't want to risk the idea of maybe not being bad enough to get Caleb Williams or Drake May next year. So they decided, hey, we're just going to take our guy now. But they also decided that they wanted to have their cake and eat it too, because they take the 12th overall pick they had, trade up to 3 with Arizona to go and take Will Anderson. So, like, this was probably one of the greatest first rounds. If both these guys hit, this is probably one of the greatest first rounds ever. And this could be the move, like the move to trade up to get Will Anderson and also come out of this draft with a franchise quarterback. That's a move that could save the Houston Texans franchise. Like, these are moves that could save this franchise from being the bottom feeder it's been for the past couple seasons. So Nick Caserio pulled that off beautifully. I loved it. And I even like some of the other things they did. Not some of these picks are just kind of like, so. I do really like the Tank Dell pick. Staying in Houston. He's another guy where it's like, had he been taller, he probably been viewed as more valuable in the draft, but he's only 5'8". He's a true slot guy with not, the best hands in the world, but he is a phenomenal route runner. I think he could be a really good slot piece for them absolutely in the future. Henry 2020. He's another guy where he's a solid linebacker, gone right in the range he should have. And I also like the Xavier Hutchinson pick from Iowa State. Just another big body receiver, good run blocker for the most part. All in all, I think this was a solid draft for the Houston Texans. Not a whole lot to talk about in these later rounds, but that first round, if they hit, that could be a franchise-altering first round that the Houston Texans just had this year. Indianapolis. Okay, let's talk about. We finally get to talk about Indianapolis. So, Indianapolis, Chris Ballard has been on the range these past couple of years. He's been on the downward trajectory as far as being viewed as one of the elite GMs in football. This one draft switched that all around in my mind. They went into this draft and said, okay, just pull up all the athletic freaks. We're just going to take a list of, we're just going to take the ranking of the most athletic prospects in this draft. And whoever the best one is that available when we're picking, we're taking them. That they just took all these super athletes and they're the best super athlete on the board whenever they were picking. And it started with Anthony Richardson. I was up in the air about him and Levis at 4. I thought Levis was a better day one starter. I thought Richardson needs a little more time to sit and develop. And he still goes to Indianapolis, where he's going to get good coaching from Shane Steichen, who just came over from Philly, working with Jalen Hurts. So I think ultimately he did end up in a good spot for him to learn and develop. And they still got some good pieces around him as well. Julius Brents was also a really solid second round pick for them. Big, tall, lanky corner. He's like 6'3" out of Kansas State. I mean, they need some help in the secondary after they traded Stephon Gilmore in the offseason. Really good pick for them. And then Josh Downs in the third round is just stupid. I don't get, y'all were watching me on the draft. I wanted my team, New England, to draft Josh Downs so badly because not just because he's a good football player, but the value in round 3 was just insane. And he goes to 79 overall to Indianapolis. And I mean, my God, it's one of the steals of the draft, really. And he's going to be such a good slot piece for them. He adds an element that they don't have in their receiving core right now. He hopefully can be what they thought Paris Johnson could be, or somewhat what they thought Paris Johnson could be. or no, was it Paris? No, not Paris Johnson. It was oh, that it was Paris something. The kid they drafted out of Ohio State a few years ago. Oh gosh. Oh god, that's not his name, not Paris Johnson. Paris Campbell. There we go. Paris Campbell, sorry. Paris Campbell, who they drafted out of Ohio State a few years ago, who didn't end up working out. They're hoping they can hit this time with Josh Downs, and he absolutely has the ability to do so. Then Blake Freeland, again, another athletic developmental tackle who's an athletic freak. And then Adetomiwa Adebawore in the 4th round. Like, are you kidding me? Why did he slip all the way to the 4th? This was a second round talent, and he slipped all the way to the middle of the 4th. Why? Someone please explain to me why that was the case and why that happened. I don't get it. Darius Rush then in the 5th is insane. Daniel Scott was another guy. Like they just drafted all, and Jalen Jones in like the 7th round is another one where it's like they didn't just get these great athletes, they got athletes who are also really good football players too. Like Indianapolis, like this, they rival for probably the best draft class of any team this year. They had a bunch of picks and they made the most out of these picks. This was perfect. This was insane. If these guys hit, oh, this Colts team can really be deadly and make some noise if all those guys hit. And then the Jacksonville Jaguars, they were a team coming in where they didn't have any like glaring needs. So they were gonna kind of just sort of take best player available for the most part. And ultimately, like they got some really good players. Nothing that like makes me super excited. I don't think. Like Anton Harrison, he was the last first round caliber tackle. He was the best tackle available. They took him. I'm not complaining about that whatsoever. I will say though, the Brenton Strange pick was not great. I will say. Uh, I mean, my God, like Darnell Washington was still there. Like Tucker Kraft was still there. Taking Brenton Strange, this low upside tight end over those other two guys who do have low high upsides. There we go. It doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, you're gonna get that every once in a while with Trent Baalke. The Tank Bigsby pick is also fine. I really like the Ventrell Miller pick though. I mean, they stay in state from Florida. He's a really good leader. He can really be some special. If maybe even be a replacement for Devin Lloyd if the tail end of last year for Devin Lloyd is the indication of what the rest of his career is going to be, then hopefully they're thinking Ventrell Miller can, if he's not like as high of an upside player as Lloyd, can at least provide the leadership that Lloyd may or may not can bring. Other than that, they got some good players. Antonio Johnson, that late's a really good pickup for them. Parker Washington, one of the more underrated receivers in this class. I really like him. He's kind of similar to like a Marvin Jones-esque kind of player. He could be a good player for them in the future. All in all, it's just a bunch of guys where it's just like nothing that gets me super, super excited. I think it's just a good average draft class of the Jacksonville Jaguars, which you were kind of expecting considering they didn't have any like glaring needs. Now the Kansas City Chiefs. Boy, hey, did you know that after night one that they were the defending Super Bowl champions? Did you know that? Well, tell you what, if you didn't know that, they were going to let you know. Wow, that was obnoxious a lot of the draft weekend. They really leaned into it. But with that being said, I was really underwhelmed with Kansas City's draft. I like the Felix Anudike-Uzomah pick at the end of the first. I actually really, really like that pick. He can provide like a better Frank Clark role for them and a team that needs edge rushers. So he was probably the best one available. I really like that. I hate the Rashee Rice pick. I absolutely hate that pick for them. He was out of all the receivers they could have had on the board, he was probably down towards the list as one of the worst. I mean, he was a guy that early on in the process got a bunch of hype as like a potential second, maybe even back into the first round guy. And then you watch him and you're just like, all right, he's a really good contested ball winner. And that's about it. Like he's a good contested ball winner, but He's only 6'1", so how effective is that really going to be? He's slow. He's not a great route runner. Doesn't create separation. He gets knocked off of routes a lot of the times. I mean, my God, they basically just took N'Keal Harry, is what it did. Like, they spent a second round pick on N'Keal Harry when Jalen Hyatt was on the board. And I'm not a big Jalen Hyatt fan, but Jalen Hyatt in Kansas City would have fit like a fucking glove. So I don't get that pick. Wanya Morris, I mean, it was best tackle available. It's fine. And then the rest of these guys, it's just kind of like, ugh. So yeah, Kansas City, I was very underwhelmed by their draft. But then again, they're the Chiefs, so it's not really going to matter. They're probably still going to at least make the AFC title game next year. So it really is not going to matter for them, I don't think, in the long run. I still hate the Rashee Rice pick, though. Then the Raiders. The Raiders had a sneakily decent draft. Like Tyree Wilson, I really like the Tyree Wilson pick, 7th overall. I mean, he was outside of Jalen Carter, the best defensive player left on the board. He can absolutely be the Chandler Jones replacement and be what they thought Chandler Jones was going to be for them, who just did not have a good year last year. Age is definitely coming up to him. But he's a really good high upside player that him and Max Crosby can really cause some havoc in that division. And then Michael Mayer in the second round, I love that pick for them. They traded away Darren Waller in the offseason to the Giants. He's not the high upside guy that they were getting with Waller, but what you're getting out of him is a good, solid starting tight end. I mean, I said during the draft why I wanted Dallas to draft him is because he's basically a Jason Witten clone. Like he's not the greatest athlete in the world, but he's just very reliable. He's the ultimate security blanket, a good enough run blocker. That's a pretty good tight end at that point in the draft. I really, really like Michael Mayer to the Raiders. And then these other guys like Byron Young out of Alabama, decent 3-tech, slightly undersized, but it doesn't really matter. Trey Tucker was interesting. Jacorian Bennett, I mean, they needed to get a Maryland speedster in there. I mean, it is the Raiders after all. We know how much they like speed. Aiden O'Connell is a solid backup, though I wouldn't have taken him over Tanner McKee personally. But then Christopher Smith at pick 170, that was what, the 4th, 5th round? Like Christopher Smith that late in the draft was an absolute steal. All in all, it was another solid draft for the Raiders, all in all. Then the Los Angeles Chargers, another team where it's like they didn't have much, but they tried to get as good a value as they could. Quentin Johnston, I've warmed up to the idea of Quentin Johnston with the Chargers. We knew they were going to go receiver in the first round, but I was convinced it was going to be Zay Flowers. But they ended up choosing Quentin Johnston, who I was very on the fence about because I was like, well, he's kind of similar size-wise to Mike Williams. But then again, it's like Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, they're always going to get hurt. So it's nice to have a guy like Quentin Johnston who can definitely fill those roles and fill them well and be a dominant after catch threat. Though he is a bigger receiver and he doesn't really play like it. He doesn't really play all that physical, but he is a dominant player with the ball in his hand. So I've warmed up to the idea of him in there with the Chargers. There we go. Deion Henley in the 3rd round. Again, not a great linebacker class. They got the best linebacker available at that point. I don't hate it whatsoever. Tuli Tuipulotu in the 2nd. Good edge rusher. They needed someone because Khalil Mack is getting up there in age. Tuli Tuipulotu is going to be a solid backup for them in year 1. Maybe even be a solid number 2 rusher in the future, which is a good thing for them because they got Joey Bosa there for the long haul. So they're going to be fine there. Jordan McFadden is also a nice, fun developmental piece at tackle in the later rounds. And also, just for shits and giggles, they also drafted Max Duggan in the 7th. I didn't think he was going to get drafted, nor did I think he should get drafted. Had he not had the big, like, Heisman finalist season at TCU, he would not have been drafted whatsoever. But hey, him and Quentin Johnston are teammates once again. So I guess that's I guess that plays towards something. But another solid draft all in all. Outside of Quentin Johnston, nothing I'm super excited about. And then the Rams, again, for a team that didn't have a first round pick, they had a shit, as you can see, they had a shit ton of draft capital to play with. And they made the most of it. They got some really good players, really good athletes. Steve Avila, then their first pick in the second round. They needed guard help. Realistically, all of these picks, they wanted to spend all of these just for depth because this is a team that, I mean, we saw it last year. They have superstar talents, they have future Hall of Fame talents, but once those future Hall of Fame talents get injured, roster wise, they were one of the worst rosters in the NFL, if not the worst roster. They had next to no depth. And that was the point of this draft, was to get as much depth as possible. And they got that. They got the other Byron Young, Kobe Turner out of Wake Forest, who I really like. Stetson Bennett is a fun backup to have, where if you get into another situation where Stafford gets hurt, Stetson Bennett can come in and right the ship and not screw anything up. Davis Allen, that late in the draft, is also a nice, fun one. Puka Nuka as well. Puka Nakua, there we go. Trey Hodges Tomlinson, kind of overrated in the pre-draft process because he's LaDainian Tomlinson's cousin, but he's an undersized corner. He'll probably be mostly a special teamer. He's fine. But yeah, all in all, this was a draft. It's a solid draft. Mainly, it's a draft just for depth and nothing more. Some starting caliber players, I think, are in this draft for sure for them. But they just need some kind of they needed to load up on depth pieces where if what last year happens again to them, they can at least feel like, all right, we have at least some pieces in here where we're not going to be completely screwed like we were last year. And then the Miami Dolphins on this is funny. One end of the spectrum, you have the Rams who have all these freaking picks. And then you had the Miami Dolphins who only came away with 4 players. Obviously, they had their first round pick stripped from them due to getting caught with their hands in the cookie jar with Tom Brady and Sean Payton. But they only had 4 picks, though. Even then, I feel like they could have came out of this draft with something a little better. I mean, Cam Smith is good. Maybe can be he's a good third corner, I guess. Maybe he could be a Jalen Ramsey replacement if they can't afford Jalen Ramsey. And then Devon Achane, he's a smaller back, speed out the ass, but he's going to be. I feel like Mike McDaniel's going to find a way to use him. And then Elijah Higgins and Ryan Hayes are just fine. All in all, I mean, it's hard to grade this draft because he only had 4 picks. I mean, you can only do so much with only 4 picks. So they did as much as they could. The Minnesota Vikings, this is another one where it was like the first pick I liked, the last pick they like, all these other picks are just kind of good / fine. Jordan Addison as a number 2 receiver to Justin Jefferson is going to be insane. Good luck, NFC North. Good luck, NFC. Good luck, league, trying to cover both those guys. Addison was never a guy that I viewed as a potential true number 1, but as a number 2 to Justin Jefferson, that is going to be insane. I love that pick for the Minnesota Vikings. Mekhi Blackman, back end of the third, decent pick at a USC. Jacqueline Roy in the 4th was good value. Jaron Hall is a decent backup. He's kind of like, I heard someone say he's a poor man's Zach Wilson, which is not very surprising, but he's the backup, so you're okay with that. And then stealing Dwayne McBride in the 7th round, he was another guy where it's like, I don't get why Dwayne McBride fell that far, but he did, and thank God he didn't go undrafted because he's going to be a Minnesota Viking. Good backup to Dalvin Cook. I really like that for them. All in all, another really good draft, really saved by the first and last pick they had. All in all, it went from a solid draft to a pretty good draft for Minnesota. Then New England. This might be contrary to popular belief, even though NFL.com agrees with me. I actually think they had a really good draft for the most part. Uh, First of all, stealing Christian Gonzalez at pick 17 is just he should have gone 8th to Atlanta. He really should have. At the latest, 12 to Detroit. He should not have slipped out of the top 15. There's no way in hell he should have. And yet, New England was still able to get him trading down 3 spots. They traded down 3 spots, picked up a 4th, and still were able to get what many consider arguably the best corner in the draft. I'm not going to go that far because Devin Witherspoon is good, but he was, I mean, if Witherspoon was 1A and Gonzalez was 1B, such a fluid athlete, knows one and only year at Oregon. He is a high upside player, and he's going to a spot that has historically churned out great player after great player at the corner position. You think of guys like J.C. Jackson, Stephon Gilmore, Asante Samuel, Darrelle Revis was there for a hot bit. This is a team that knows how to get the most out of corners, and he's going to go to the perfect spot for him. Same for Keion White. I wasn't the biggest fan of Keion White, but drafting him in the 2nd round, I think, is good. And, you know, he's another like tweener type, too big to play edge, too small to play 3 tech, but he's very versatile in that regard because of that. He does have some athletic upside, though he didn't really show it in his testing numbers. Make that what you will. But Keion White's gone to probably the best spot for him, a team that runs a lot of stunts. They were 2nd in stunts ran last year. And I think Keion White's going to be the eventual Dedrick Wise replacement and maybe even potentially even be better than what they have in Dedrick Wise, potentially. But ultimately, I think a player that got a little too much hype, but he went to the perfect spot for him. Now, those of you with me at the draft, I was ranting about this pick mainly just because Josh Downs was still on the board and I really wanted Josh Downs. And also, I was looking at some draft boards and I tried to find him because ESPN had him listed as a linebacker. Even here, they have him listed as a linebacker. A lot of draft boards had him listed as a safety, hence why I couldn't find him. But after looking at it and doing my research on him a little more, it makes more sense. Would I have still gone it? Probably not, but I understand why. I mean, Adrian Phillips can only play so long. He's going to be the Adrian Phillips replacement. People are comparing him to Kyle Duggar. He's not as athletic as Kyle Duggar because Kyle Duggar is just in a league of his own in that regard. But New England does this all the time. They love those 3 safety packages, and he can absolutely play that role for them. Absolutely. And then again, day 3, I like their day 3 a lot more than most people. I mean, I hate the idea of trading up for a kicker. And of course, they took a kicker and a punter. Of course, Belichick couldn't help himself. But they got a lot of depth on the interior line, drafting Jake Andrews. I mean, good backup center David Andrews. Ironically, you got David Andrews and Jake Andrews. I'm noticing a theme with this team and getting a lot of guys who have the same last name as other players on the team. But Jake Andrews is going to be a good backup to David Andrews, he's up there in age and he's battled injuries these past couple of years. So you draft a guy out of Troy who can go in there if Andrews gets hurt and not screw anything up. Same thing with City. So he's another smaller school guy with high upside. So I like that pick. I love the Antonio Mafe pick in the 4th round. I mean, he was another Shrine Bowl guy that I kind of fell in love with. So I really like that pick. The 2 wide receiver picks are interesting. Demario Douglas is a guy that I think Bill O'Brien. He's another Shrine Bowl guy. The Patriots coaching staff is obviously at the Shrine Bowl. Demario Douglas is a guy that Bill O'Brien was probably pounding the table for. I mean, he is a do-it-all slot guy that has a little more juice that the Patriots offensive receiving core doesn't have right now. So I can absolutely see him making this team because of that. And he can even be an impact player within a year or 2 on the offense potentially. And believe it or not, same goes for Kayshon Boutte. Like, Boutte was a guy, remember, at one point in time after his sophomore year at LSU, he was viewed as like the next great LSU wide receiver with Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. Kayshon Boutte was viewed as that guy, but he's dealt with injuries since then. He hasn't been on the field that much. His production has kind of fallen off a bit. He's had a lot of character red flags with him, arguing with coaches, getting in fights with players and coaches, just kind of checking out mentally in the middle of games. Had a horrible combine performance, like a laughably bad combine performance. And that tanked his stock from being viewed at one point as a guy that could have been the best receiver in this draft class to people didn't even think he was going to get drafted. So I don't mind the idea of taking a 6th round dart throw on Kayshon Boutte, because if he hits and he gets his shit together, you have a high upside player that can be a game changer. If not, you spend a 6th round pick on him, no harm, no foul. So I actually really like that pick. And also Isaiah Bolden, the Jackson State pick in the 7th round. I also really like that as well. All in all, I thought this was a really, really damn good draft for New England. Some people wanted more high upside receivers, but considering that in the 6th round, they still came away with 2 guys that can be impacts for them in the short future, I think, and you got some really good potential game changers on defense. I really like this draft for the New England Patriots. Then New Orleans. I'm just going to speed by this one because there isn't a ton here to talk about. Bryan Bresee is a good pick for them. I mean, they needed somebody on that defensive line. Same reason they pick Isaiah Foskey. Were there better edge players? Yes. But all in all, I think Bresee and Foskey are solid, good picks for them. The Jake Haener pick is interesting. He has the potential to be, but maybe the Brock Purdy of this class. Jake Haener does. He was a really fun quarterback out of Fresno State, but he's very undersized, and we know New Orleans has had a history with undersized quarterback. I mean, my God, Drew Brees was there for how many years? So they're not afraid to take these smaller quarterbacks. And then their last pick, A.T. Perry falling to the 6th round, is just how? Like, that might be my favorite pick of their draft class is A.T. Perry in the 6th. Like, just getting him, a guy that big, that lanky, who's that smooth of a route runner and an athlete, and getting a guy like that in the 6th round is really, really valuable. I can absolutely see him making this team and even being an impact for them year one. So again, another solid draft for New Orleans. And then the Giants, they got some really good scheme fits and players I really like. I really like the Deonte Banks pick in the 1st round. Corner depth was a sneaky need for them, and they got arguably the best corner in the draft, or at least they got definitely the best corner available at that point. But Deonte Banks, he was in the same conversation as Christian Gonzalez as one of the better corners in this draft class. So I really like that. I love the John Michael Schmitz pick in the 2nd round for them. He was a guy that a lot of people said they should have taken in the 1st. So to get him in the back end of the 2nd is incredible. Jalen Hyatt, like I said before, I was lower on Jalen Hyatt because he's such a weird player to project. Like, he's got long speed, but he only ran a 4.4 at the combine. He's tall, but he's very skinny and lanky. He never faced press coverage at Tennessee, and he basically just got free releases the entire time there. So we have no idea what he's like against man-to-man coverage. I trust Brian Daboll enough to find a way to manufacture touches for Jalen Hyatt because he does have good speed in game, but it's a wait and see with him. And then these other guys are fine picks that I don't even know if they're going to even make the team. But all in all, I think this is a really, really good draft for the New York Giants. They got 2 excellent football players and one guy that could be sneakily good for them in the future if used properly. The New York Jets, maybe it's Aaron Rodgers. Maybe it's the Aaron Rodgers effect of, for some reason, no matter what happens, no matter what team he's on, his team is just not going to draft wide receivers. I mean, granted, or just any receiving talents to help him out on the offensive side of the ball. Granted, they didn't really need it as far as receivers go because I think they're good at that. But it was very weird at first when you traded down in the pick swap with Green Bay and drafted Will McDonald, who I saw as more of like a second round guy. So that was a definite reach in my eyes for him. And also it doesn't help that New England basically basically cock blocked the Jets from getting a tackle in Broderick Jones. So I definitely feel that as like they panicked and took Will McDonald instead. But other than that, like I really like the Joe Tippmann pick, though it is kind of weird because they just re-signed Connor McGovern. So I don't know if they're going to move Tippmann to guard or they're going to move McGovern to guard because I see Tippmann as more of a true center. We'll just have to wait and see. Israel Benaconda is an interesting fit here. He could be a really good backup to Breece Hall. And then this was probably my favorite pick of the draft. Zach Kuntz in the 7th round. This dude, if you haven't looked up his testing numbers, this dude was an athletic monster at the combine at Old Dominion. And he's coming off a year where he was injured most of the year, but he's like 6'7", like 250. Just this freak of an athlete, ran a 4.5, put up like 23 bench reps. He has this insane his athletic upside is through the moon. And if the Jets develop him properly and they use him properly, he can be a dominating game changer for them. Absolutely. But all in all, I think this was a solid draft for the New York Jets. A bit underwhelming, but solid overall. It was only a matter of time. It was only a matter of time. Look, it's not even fair. Howie Roseman is just, this is Howie Roseman's world, and we're all just living in it. First of all, Jalen Carter at 9 is just stupid. So, I mean, we all expected Jalen Carter to fall in the top 10, but Philly is just like, of course, he's the perfect Philadelphia Eagle. And if all those character concerns around him do hold up, he's going to a good place as Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham. He's got some good guys around him to sort of keep him in line. And just in case those guys don't help, you draft Nolan Smith at 30. Why was Nolan Smith available at pick 30? Why? Why was that the case? Why did that happen? Because Nolan Smith, and if Nolan Smith is just the ultimate leader, like everyone in that Georgia defense said, like if there was one guy who was the leader of that defense, it was Nolan Smith. Not to mention the fact that even though he's undersized in edge rusher, he's still a really damn good one. So now all of a sudden you got a defensive line that lost Devon Hargrave, but they already had Jordan Davis, Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox. Now you add Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith to that team. And then they got Keely Ringo as a defensive back in like the 4th round. My God, they're legit trying to recreate the Georgia Bulldog defense. I made a joke saying like they're the Philadelphia Bulldogs. They are trying to recreate that defense. And they drafted Jordan Davis last year and Nakobe Dean last year. I mean, my Lord, they are just drafting Georgia players, and it is the funniest thing. And it's working for them. That's the crazy thing. It's working for them. And then Tyler Steen in the 3rd round is fine. Good backup guard who can be a starting caliber guard. Sidney Brown is another one where it's just like, that's insane. And then Tanner McKee is a really good backup. Then Moro Ujamo in the 7th. He was another guy that shouldn't have been available that late that Philly scoops up. Of course they did. Oh, and by the way, they traded for DeAndre Swift as well in the middle of the draft because of course they did. Philadelphia is just, it's Super Bowl or bust for them. And I think they know that. It is Super Bowl or bust for them. I can't envision a world where they're not the best team in football next year. It's insane, man. Howie Roseman, you were just an animal. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, this is another amazing draft. Like, trading up 3 spots to get your franchise tackle in Broderick Jones when there were really no other tackles left, to go up and secure one where they were nervous they weren't going to be able to. That was such a great move for them. Then they fulfill the nepotism pick with Joey Porter at the top of the second. And even then, like, Joey Porter is still an excellent football player that should not have fallen out of the first round. Like, he should have gone like in the middle of the draft in the 20s somewhere, and they got him at the top of the second. He should not have been a second round pick, but that is still, they got 2 first round caliber players, and they are both going to be really damn good football players for them. Keanu Benton is another guy where it's like, they don't really have any force in the middle outside of Cameron Hayward, who's getting up there in age. And Keanu Benton could be that as a run defender and as a pass rusher. And he just feels like a Pittsburgh Steeler. And then Darnell Washington in the 3rd. Him and Pat Freiermuth. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I mean, Darnell Washington already knows what it's like to play basically the number 2 tight end with what's that guy at Georgia? He's going to be a first round pick next year, Brock Bowers. So he already knows what that's like. He's going to be there with Pat Freiermuth. Are you kidding me? And then Nick Herbig in the 4th is incredible value. Corey Trice in the 7th is just like, at that point, it's like, all right, you're bullshitting me at that point. Corey Trice, he should have been like at the latest a 4th round pick. He fell to the 7th. That is insane. I mean, this is arguably like, these 2, ironically, both teams in the state of Pennsylvania, these 2 picks, these 2 drafts are just insane, bro. Insane. One draft class that was not insane is the San Francisco 49ers, who, I mean, they didn't have picks in the first 2 rounds, so yeah, they can only do so much, but they still had good draft capital. And even then, it's like, do I lead off with the fact that they took a kicker in the 3rd round with their 2nd pick of the draft? I'm leading off with that. That is dumb. Why? In the 3rd round, why? Why? Doesn't make sense. And then they traded up for a guy who, like, at that point was like the 6th best safety on the board, and you had guys like Sidney Brown and Antonio Johnson still on the board. It just didn't make sense at that point to trade up for him. Cameron Latu is fine. D Winters is probably their best pick in this draft. Getting him in the 6th round was really good. And then Ronnie Bell, a speedster out of Michigan. Other than that, not really much to work with. This was very underwhelming. That was a very underwhelming draft for the San Francisco 49ers. And then counteract that with Seattle, who once again is just, oh my gosh. Like, first of all, they shocked everyone by taking Devon Witherspoon at 5. Like, everyone, I was convinced it was either Jalen Carter or Tyree Wilson, and they shocked everyone taking Devon Witherspoon. They're basically trying to recreate the Legion of Boom, because Devon Witherspoon, I mean, he's an excellent cover corner, but he is a vicious tackler. He is an insane tackler. And him opposite Tariq Woolen with Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs in the back end, they're trying to recreate the Legion of Boom. And that's a really fun pick with them. And then everyone thought, like, even then, they still got their edge rusher in Derek Hall, who he was very up and down. Like, in the pre-draft process, everyone either loved Derek Hall or hated Derek Hall. I kind of like Derek Hall, and he's going to a really good spot where he can be a really effective piece for them. And then, oh my God, Jackson Smith-Njigba pick 20. Like, that's just unfair. Like, Geno Smith, if Geno Smith doesn't break his passing record that he set for the Seahawks last year, then something ain't right, because he's going to have a receiving trio of DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba in the slot. I mean, my God, like, that's arguably the best receiving core day one. Like, right now, that's like the best receiving core in the league right now, especially if JSN hits. I mean, that's just insane. Zach Charbonnet, he's basically kind of like the Kenneth Walker pick from last year, though he's not nearly the athlete or the player Kenneth Walker was coming out. But he's a good backup running back. They lost Rashad Penny in free agency. He's going to be a really, really sound, do it all running back for them. And then other guys, I mean, they double dipped their running back in the 7th with Kenny McIntosh, which is another steal at that point. I mean, other than that, they got a bunch of solid, decent players. But this top end of the draft was just incredible for Seattle. I really like this draft for them. Tampa Bay, we're almost there. We're almost at the finish line. Tampa Bay, I thought at pick 19, this would have been a possible Will Levis landing spot, especially considering their only quarterbacks on the roster was Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. So I figured they would have gone with a quarterback at some point. They end up not drafting a quarterback at all in this draft. They take Elijah Cansey at 19, which I think is actually a really fun fit. He is the anti Vita Vea. So like Vita Vea is like this big, like one of the bigger nose tackles in the league. And Kalijah Cansey is going to come in as one of the smallest defensive tackles in the league, but he has such an insane first step. He's so quick off the ball. He's a much more powerful player than you would think at someone who's 6'3", 280. And he's going to be a really interesting player for them. They could even use him as an edge player if they wanted to. Cody Mock is a solid one. He was the best offensive lineman available at that point. Servatia Dennis, he could potentially be the Devin White replacement depending on what happens to him. I really like that value in the 4th round. And then Trey Palmer is a nice speedster out of Nebraska. Yaya Diaby is another edge rusher I really like. All in all, I think this is another really good draft for Tampa. I don't agree with the A pick necessarily because I don't know how many of these guys outside of maybe Cansey could be like game changers. But all in all, this was a solid draft all around for them. Tennessee nailed the first 3 picks. Nailed them. Peter Skoronski falling to them at 11 when I don't think they were expecting him to fall to 11. They cut Taylor Lewan. That offensive line was terrible last year. Sure that up with a tackle who could be a franchise guy with Peter Skoronski. Everyone was concerned about his arm length, and they thought he would project better as a guard. He could play guard, but they need him at tackle right now. And I still think he's good enough that he can play tackle day one. And then even if they wanted Will Levis, they still traded the farm to go up and get him at the top of the 2nd when he fell out of the 1st round entirely. That was still, in my opinion, the shocker of the draft that Will Levis fell completely out of the 1st round. I didn't think that should have been the case. I felt so bad for him watching him, just the camera constantly panning to him. And I can't imagine what that kid was going through. But the Tennessee Titans made things right by him. They traded up, they got him. And now, I mean, I think he's better right now than Malik Willis for sure. And I do think he will eventually beat out Ryan Tannehill at some point. And I do think he will play at some point. And by the way, I realized this after the draft. CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Will Levis, they're all in the same division now. They're all playing in the AFC South. And that is going to be interesting for the future because if one or two of those guys hits and the other doesn't, you know the other team's fan base is going to make fun of that team for who knows how many years. So that's going to be a lot of fun to follow. And then Tyjae Spears, he's going to be a really good backup running back for Derrick Henry and maybe even the starter if they end up trading Derrick Henry or moving him some way. I mean, these other 3 picks are just the Josh Wiley pick I didn't really like. But all in all, I thought this was a really good draft for Tennessee. They got a guy that could be their quarterback of the future. They got their franchise tackle, and they got a guy who could be a really good running back for them, depending on what happens with Derrick Henry. And then are we at the end? Ladies and gentlemen, we are finally at the end with the Washington Commanders. And boy, oh boy, where do we start? The only pick I really love for the Washington Commanders is their second round pick when they took Jartavius Martin out of Illinois. And he's the only one out of all of these guys that I'm like, I absolutely love. He's a really good scheme fit. He was outside of Brian Branch, the second best safety in this class, behind Brian Branch, that is. Other than that, all these other guys are just kind of meh. They're so. And then Emmanuel Forbes in the first round, they reached like hell on him to pass up Christian Gonzalez at pick 16 when he would have been a perfect scheme fit for them. It will never make sense to me, especially considering you're taking a 6'1", 166-pound corner over him. And yes, he was a Mr. Interception in Mississippi State, but a lot of those were on plays where he got beat. Like a lot of those were just kind of interceptions he lucked into. Now, I will say Emmanuel Forbes, he's a much better run defender than his size might entail. But in the NFL level, like, they're just going to run tosses and sweeps in his direction every single time. And I don't know. I didn't view him as a first round player. So to take him at 16 was just, I really didn't like that, especially considering literally outside of Devon Witherspoon, literally every other corner was available and you took Emmanuel Forbes. I didn't really like that. All in all, it was a below average draft outside of Jartavius Martin, who I really like. Now, Emmanuel Forbes is a scheme fit, so it could work for them, but just compared to the guys they liked, I didn't like it. And ladies and gentlemen, that is it. That is a wrap. We are finally done. We've recapped the draft. We are now at the dead point of the off season officially. That is until training camps roll around, mini camps starting up soon. So that will be very fascinating to see how that goes. But we are officially in the dead period of the off season. So with that being said, I am Double Diesel. Peace.